Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of our show, Unsuccessful, the show where we sit down with successful people and find out how they navigate from failure to success. I'm your host, Nicole Mail, and today we present to you a professor who demonstrates theater success. Everyone, I want to introduce you to today's guest, Rachel Evans. How are you today?
I am living the dream, Nicole.
I'm glad to hear. Now, in this interview, I want to start our first question and ask, this is going all the way back. Where did all of this passion for theater start?
My parents were both in theater. So my father was a director and a college professor, and my mother was a costume designer. And when I was a kid, they had a barn theater, literally an old barn that had been converted into a summer theater. And I grew up cleaning toilets and being on stage and watching my parents make theater, and so it was just sort of inevitable that I went into the family business.
I love that. It's such a beautiful thing to see when you have that family business side of it, because then you really get all those aspects and you can just really enjoy every single moment in theater. But can you share how those lifestyle experiences shaped you as a person and into where you are right now?
Well, I fought it for a long while. I thought maybe I'll be a cosmetic chemist. I wanted to make makeup and things like that. And then I had a teacher when I was in high school say that, if you don't go on in theater, it's going to be a loss to the profession. You really have a gift for it, and that I was able to use everything that I learned when I was a kid and apply it to that field and be successful.
Wow. It's not often that you hear, I know a lot of the times people who have family businesses, they don't want to take it over, but you never hear of that in the theater world. Mm-hmm. But when your high school teacher had told you that was a loss to the world, that's such a compliment, a high compliment. I want to see some of the shows that you were in. But my next question for you, did theater inspire you when you were growing up as a kid? And if it did, how did it inspire you?
It did. Because I saw it from the side of the people making the theater, I was able to see how much they enjoyed it, how the creativity was satisfying to them, that the collaboration was really meaningful. And then we were able to affect audiences with what we had done together. And that really inspired me to think that this is worth doing, this is worth pursuing.
I love that. That's so wholesome, too. I love it. Now, did you ever encounter a situation of failure within your career in theater? And if so, how did that influence you in the path that you continue to take?
So I went to Hofstra University for my undergraduate, and I was a BFA acting major. I thought I was going to be an actress. And then at my senior year, I decided that I wanted to be a director instead. So I applied to a bunch of graduate programs in theater. I got into the University of Pittsburgh, where they actually wanted to admit me right into the PhD program. They were starting a new program where they were going to take young, promising scholars in theater, give them their master's degree simultaneously with their doctorate, and try to flood the market with really young doctors in theater. And so I was the guinea pig. And so I was there for 4 years taking graduate classes. They gave me an assistantship, so that was paying my rent and all of my living expenses. I had health insurance. It was a good deal. But by the end of the 4 years, they had to say, hey, Rachel, you need to stop doing theater. You need to read more, write more, try to get published. And I was 21 years old, and there was no way I was going to give up actually doing theater yet. So they told me that I really didn't have a choice, that it was either I had to continue in the PhD path or choose something else. And at that point, I was really discouraged, but I decided that I went back to where I started, that I wanted to get an MFA in theater directing. And so they said, well, then why don't you just do that? So I spent 1 more year at University of Pittsburgh just directing shows. I think I directed 4 shows in 8 months and honed my skills as a director, gave up on the PhD, and that really changed my life. So it was a setback at first to realize that I wasn't going to get the PhD, but ultimately it was what I wanted and where I was meant to be.
I didn't even know that they had PhD programs in theater, but it makes sense to move off of that path. That way you can have the experience in directing, and clearly that was where you were meant to be. You've come so far. I know you've had great successes here at Kane. And, speaking of that, you've been creating theater for a good portion of your life and a good portion of your career alone. And I just want to know, do you want to tell us about any challenges that there was just in creating theater itself?
I feel like with every play that I tackle, there's always like one problem, like one moment in the script where you're like, this was my initial instinct. This is what really drew me in. This was my vision. But at some point in the process, you have to sort of acknowledge, like, I have to rethink this. I need to go backwards and come up with a new way to tackle this problem. So I feel like every play has that moment of crisis for the director when you're feeling like something's not working, something that's right, and it's usually your first assumption that you need to go back and change.
Interesting. And now, speaking of that, I know that theater is inherently such a collaborative process. Can you share a little bit about the challenges of, having those ideas in your head as a director, but also needing to make sure that your team agrees with that as well?
It's a give and take. Like you said, it's a process and a collaboration. So it takes a lot of listening, active listening, to hear what other people have to say. And ultimately, I prefer that. If it was all my ideas, it'd be pretty boring. But luckily, I have the opportunity to work with lots of very gifted collaborators, both students, faculty, and staff here at Kane. And they inspire me and take the shows that I'm directing to new heights.
I love that. That's awesome. And I would agree, even in media and film, and that's, really where I have my skill set. That's such an important step in the process, is being able to work with others, because you're right. If it was just up to one person, the idea, the show, the play would not be nearly as interesting because you don't have those same experiences. But speaking of plays, according to my sources, I heard that in 2024, in the spring, you toured with some graduate students here at Kane across the country playing Country Mouse and the Missing Lunch Mystery. Now, what was the main purpose that you wanted your students to take out of this tour?
So it's actually a class that Kane offers to its theater majors, an opportunity to spend from January until spring break rehearsing a play, and then after spring break we tour to local elementary schools. And so a lot of students actually get their first job in theater, their first legitimate professional job doing touring theater for children. So we offer this class to prepare them for that opportunity. And the students that are in the class are responsible for loading the truck, getting to the site at the school, unloading the truck, setting everything up, costumes, scenery, props, and then doing the performance, and then packing it all back up and coming back to school. So I really wanted them to have that full circle experience and have a deep sense of ownership for the play, and then also to bring the joy of live theater to young children that probably wouldn't see theater if it wasn't for us being in their school for that day's assembly. And for some of those young people, it's their very first live theater show. So it's really special to all of us that are involved in the project.
That's really sweet. And it's true. Like, I think one of my first experiences with theater was with a school play, and it really does make an impact on the children. But I like that class, it almost feels like an internship the way that you described it. So you get a little bit of professional experience, but you're still getting course credits. I like that a lot. That's really nice. Now, how has your approach to theater education evolved over the course of the time that you've been a professor?
That's a good question. I know that when I first came to Kane, I saw some of my colleagues and the way the students reacted to them. They always said, "Oh my gosh, that class is so hard. That professor's so good." And so I started to equate the two, that being hard was the way that you were a good professor. And so for a while, I sort of use that philosophy that, oh, I'll just make the class really challenging for my students and that'll make me a better professor. But then I learned that wasn't the right approach for me. That I had to go back to thinking about what I wanted them to learn and what experience I wanted them to have. And if they were able to master those skills and that knowledge in a fun, enjoyable, low-stress way, that was actually a better fit for me as a professor.
I would agree with that. As a student, I definitely think sometimes the harder the class doesn't always mean I'm going to get more out of it. But from everything that I know, I have heard great reviews about you just as a professor alone here at Kane. But I want to take a step back to the beginning of your career and ask you a question about that. So if you could go back all the way to the beginning, what advice would you give to yourself at that time?
That's a good question. I think I took for granted the fact that theater was available to me as a young person since it was the family business. And I didn't always see it from other people's point of view. Now I see so many of our students facing the challenge of having to convince their parents and their caregivers that theater is an okay career to go into, and they have to be very persuasive. And so I took that for granted. I wouldn't take that for granted anymore. I would realize that I was very fortunate to be exposed to theater as a young person, and that my parents actually wanted me to pursue my dreams and go on in the family business, and I would take that back.
That's a good reflection to have. I think definitely within anything in the arts, it's always a persuasive conversation with your parents, especially as you get into college of, I really want to go into this, but to have the ability to your parents to sit down and tell you, like, we would love for you to go into this theater business. That's a privilege just in itself.
Exactly.
I would agree.
Exactly. Just last week, we had a current Kane student audition for the Theater Conservatory, and she was able to do that because she convinced her parents that it was worth giving it a try, and that if she auditioned for the conservatory and she got in, that was a sign that she was meant to pursue it. And so it was really a beautiful thing when she actually came. She nailed the audition. We admitted her to the program, and I was able to send her the email that says, "Welcome, you're admitted to the Theater Conservatory."
That's amazing. I love that. I love stories like that. And it's true. Sometimes those things are just those little signs. It's like a momentum push, and you're meant to be in this spot. Now, lastly, I just want to ask you, what legacy do you hope to leave behind in theater and also in theater education and performing arts?
Well, I know it sounds corny, but we really do work in the business of making students' dreams come true. So I'd like that to be the legacy, that students felt like they had this vision, somebody in their life told them, you should go into theater, it's okay to go into theater, pursue your dreams, and that me and my colleagues in the Theater Conservatory work to make those dreams a reality. I know that sounds really cheesy, but it's true.
No, sometimes the cheesiest sounding things are really the best, most sound pieces of, advice or hopes that you can give to the world. It's a beautiful thing. But thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you guys for listening. This was an incredible story about just your upbringing and everything about you. I hope to see you again soon. It was really a pleasure to have you here on the show, Unsuccessful. I'm your host, Nicole Mail, and until next time.